"You're making a mistake," she said, her voice calm but firm, the kind of calm that doesn't come from fear but from certainty. Yet the metal click of the handcuffs answered her before the officer ever could, sharp and final in the late afternoon air, as Naomi Carter stood beside her car in a quiet grocery store parking lot, one hand still hovering near a paper bag that had torn at the bottom, apples rolling slowly across the sun-warmed pavement, their soft thuds the only sound that didn't belong. To tension, Officer Daniel Brooks stepped closer, posture rigid, eyes already convinced of a story he hadn't bothered to question. "Ma'am, you match the description," he said, his tone practiced, detached, like a line repeated too many times to feel. But nothing about her matched anything except the assumption sitting behind his badge. Naomi didn't pull away, didn't raise her voice, didn't even glance at the growing circle of onlookers gathering a few feet away, phones rising instinctively, capturing, judging, whispering, the low hum of curiosity building into something heavier, something sharper. Her breathing remained steady, shoulders relaxed, as if she understood something no one else did yet. The sunlight reflected off the windshield of her car, casting a brief glare that cut across both their faces, freezing the moment in a strange, suspended stillness. Brooks reached for the second cuff, his movements quick, efficient, unaware of how quickly control can shift when built on the wrong foundation. A woman in the crowd leaned closer to another, whispering something uncertain, hesitant, like a thought forming too late. Naomi's eyes moved once, not to the officer, not to the cameras, but to the groceries scattered at her feet, a quiet acknowledgement of something ordinary interrupted by something unnecessary. She said nothing more, and somehow that silence carried more weight than anything she could have argued. A police radio crackled faintly from Brooks' shoulder. Background noise at first, ignored, just another voice in a day filled with them. But then it sharpened, a name repeated once, then again, clearer this time, louder, urgent in a way that didn't belong to routine calls. Brooks hesitated, just for a fraction of a second, barely noticeable, but enough to shift the air around them, enough for the crowd to feel that something wasn't lining up the way it should. Naomi lifted her chin slightly, not in defiance, not in challenge, but in quiet presence, as if she had already stepped beyond this moment while everyone else was still trapped inside it. The officer's grip tightened instinctively, not out of control, but out of uncertainty he couldn't name. And somewhere behind him, someone in the crowd finally said it out loud, barely above a whisper, "Wait, isn't she?" The whisper did not finish, but it did not need to, because the air had already changed, the kind of shift that does not make a sound but presses against every person standing there. Officer Brooks felt it before he understood it, a subtle tightening in his chest, as the radio on his shoulder came alive again, louder this time, sharper. "Unit 12, confirm identity immediately." The voice said, no longer background noise but a command that cut through the moment. Brooks turned his head slightly, irritation flickering across his face as if the interruption annoyed him more than the situation itself. "Stand by," he muttered under his breath, still holding onto the version of reality he had built seconds ago. Naomi Carter remained still, her hands secured but her posture unchanged, her gaze steady and level, not fixed on him but somewhere just beyond, as if she was already looking at the outcome rather than the moment. A man near the front of the crowd stepped closer, squinting, trying to place her face. "I have seen her before," he said quietly, not to anyone in particular, just loud enough for doubt to begin spreading. Phones continued recording, but now they were not just capturing an arrest, they were capturing uncertainty. Brooks shifted his weight, his grip adjusting slightly, not rough, not forceful, just uncertain, the kind of adjustment a person makes when something stops aligning the way it should. "Ma'am, you need to cooperate," he said again, repeating the line as if repetition could make it more true. Naomi finally spoke, her voice even, measured. "I am cooperating," she said, and there was no edge in it, no accusation, just a statement so simple it left no room for argument. The radio cracked again. This time the voice carried a tone that could not be ignored. "Officer Brooks, who do you have in custody?" There was a pause, a longer one. Heavy, expectant, Brooks exhaled slowly, glancing at Naomi for the first time with something other than assumption. "Female, mid-40s, possible match to reported description," he replied, his words sounding less certain than before. The silence that followed stretched just long enough to become uncomfortable. Then the response came, slower now, deliberate, repeat the name. Brooks hesitated, because he had not asked, because he had not needed to in the version of the story he had already decided. He looked at her again, really looked this time, at the calm in her expression, the absence of panic, the quiet control that did not match the situation he believed he was handling. Ma'am, what is your name? He asked, and the question landed differently than anything else he had said so far. Naomi met his eyes fully now, and for the first time there was something else there. Not anger, not fear, but clarity, the kind that does not rush. Naomi Carter, she answered, and the name seemed to settle into the space around them. Not loudly, not dramatically, just firmly, as if it had been waiting its turn. The radio went silent for half a second, then a sharp intake of breath on the other end, barely contained, followed by a voice that no longer sounded routine. Say that again. And in that moment, the certainty Brooks had been standing on began to feel like something thinner than he expected. Something that might not hold. The silence on the radio did not last long, but it stretched just enough to pull every eye tighter toward the scene. Confirm again, the voice said, slower now, each word measured, as if the person on the other end already knew something Brooks did not. He swallowed once, the motion subtle but real. Naomi Carter, he repeated, and this time the name did not feel like just a response. It felt like a shift, like a line being drawn somewhere he could not see yet. The reply came instantly, no hesitation, no static, just clarity. Officer, do not move that individual. Repeat, do not proceed. The tone was different now, not routine dispatch, not background chatter, but command, the kind that carried weight beyond the street. Brooks blinked once, his grip loosening without him realizing it. Not fully releasing, just enough for the change to register in the small space between control and doubt. He glanced around. The crowd was no longer just watching. They were reading him now, sensing the hesitation, phone still raised but no longer steady, whispers growing louder, sharper. I told you. Someone said under their breath, another voice, more certain. She is not who he thinks she is. Naomi stood exactly where she had been, her shoulders relaxed, her breathing even, as if none of this had altered her center. She did not step back, did not lean forward, did not try to explain anything further, and somehow that made everything louder. Brooks reached for his radio, pressing the button with a firmer hand than he felt. Dispatch, clarify, he said, trying to regain the ground he felt slipping. A pause. Then the answer came. Precise, undeniable. Officer Brooks, that is Federal Judge Naomi Carter. The words landed without force but carried impact anyway. Not explosive, not dramatic, just final, like a door closing somewhere behind him. The air around them shifted again, this time not subtle, this time visible in the way the crowd leaned in the way a few phones lowered just slightly as if the moment had crossed from spectacle into something heavier. Brooks did not speak immediately, because there was nothing left to confirm, nothing left to reinterpret. Only the reality he had not checked before acting. His hand dropped from the radio slowly, his eyes returning to Naomi, but now he was seeing her differently, not as a situation to control, but as a presence he had misjudged, and that realization did not come with noise. It came with a quiet pressure that settled into his posture, the kind that makes a person aware of every movement they just made. Naomi met his gaze again, calm, unchanged, not triumphant, not accusing, just present, as if she had known this moment would arrive without needing to push it there. Somewhere behind them, a car door opened, another unit pulling in, but this arrival felt different, not like reinforcement, more like correction. Brooks exhaled slowly. The certainty he started with now gone, replaced by something far less comfortable. The understanding that control, once assumed, can disappear without warning when built on the wrong assumption. The second patrol car rolled in slowly, not with urgency, but with weight, tires crunching lightly over loose gravel as the engine idled low. And when the door opened, the man who stepped out did not rush. He took in the scene first, the scattered groceries, the small crowd, the raised phones, and finally Naomi Carter standing still with quiet composure. Officer Brooks straightened instinctively, as if posture alone could restore what had already shifted. "Sir," he began, but the arriving officer lifted a hand slightly, not dismissive, just enough to pause him. His eyes moved to Naomi, and in that look there was recognition, not surprise, not confusion, but confirmation of what had already been said over the radio. "Judge Carter," he said, his tone respectful, measured, the kind that did not need to be loud to be heard. The words settled into the space like a final piece of a puzzle no one could now deny. Brooks felt it immediately. The difference between assumption and fact, between authority claimed and authority real. His hand moved without thinking, releasing the restraint, the small metallic sound softer this time, almost swallowed by the quiet that followed. Naomi lowered her hand slowly, not rubbing her wrists, not reacting, just returning them to her sides as if this moment did not deserve more than acknowledgement. The crowd shifted again, but now the energy had changed completely. Whispers turned into statements. Phones captured something else now, not just what happened, but what it meant. The arriving officer stepped closer, his voice low, controlled. "Ma'am, I apologize for the situation," he said, not overly formal, not rehearsed, just direct. Naomi inclined her head slightly, not accepting, not rejecting, simply hearing it. Her gaze moved briefly to the groceries still scattered across the ground, then back to the officer. "Thank you," she replied, her voice steady, unchanged, as if nothing about her had moved even when everything around her had. Brooks stood a step behind now, no longer at the center of the moment he had created, his shoulders still squared but no longer certain. The radio on his shoulder remained silent this time, no longer guiding him, no longer filling the gaps, because there was nothing left to clarify, only to face. A woman from the crowd stepped forward quietly and picked up one of the fallen apples, placing it gently back into the torn bag, a small act that carried more weight than anyone expected. The scene no longer felt like an incident. It felt like a correction unfolding in real time. Naomi took a slow breath, the kind that does not release tension but acknowledges it. Her eyes moved once more across the parking lot, not searching, not scanning, just observing, as if she was taking note of everything without needing to say it out loud. The arriving officer turned slightly toward Brooks, his voice lower now, meant only for him. But the shift was visible even without hearing the words. Brooks nodded once, a small, restrained motion, not agreement, not defense, just recognition of something he could not undo. And in that moment, the weight of what had happened settled fully into place, not with noise, not with confrontation, but with a quiet clarity that left no space for misunderstanding. No one spoke for a moment, and that silence did not feel empty. It felt full, like something had just settled into place, and everyone present understood it without needing words. Officer Brooks shifted his stance again, but there was no position left that felt correct. The space he had filled minutes ago was no longer his to stand in. Naomi Carter bent slightly and picked up one of the paper bags herself, careful, unhurried, gathering what had been scattered as if restoring something simple mattered more than addressing something complicated. The apples went back in one by one, their soft weight settling into the bag, a quiet rhythm that contrasted everything that had just happened. The second officer watched her for a moment, then stepped forward. "Let me help you with that," he said, his tone respectful, not out of obligation, but awareness. Naomi paused, then gave a small nod, allowing the gesture without comment, because dignity did not require refusal, it required balance. Brooks looked at the ground, then at his hands, then back up, as if searching for something to say that would realign the moment, but nothing came, because some moments do not allow words to repair them, only time, and even that is uncertain. A woman from the crowd stepped closer again, this time offering the last item, a small carton that had rolled further away than the rest. Naomi accepted it with a quiet, "Thank you," her voice unchanged, steady as before, the same tone she had used when everything was uncertain, and now when everything was clear. The crowd had grown quieter, phones lowering not because the moment was over, but because it had become something more than something to record. It had become something to understand. Brooks finally spoke, his voice lower than before, lacking the sharp edge it carried earlier. "Ma'am, he began, but the sentence did not finish, not because he was interrupted, But because he realized there was no version of it that could match what had already been done, Naomi looked at him then, fully, not with judgment, not with anger, but with a clarity that left no room for misunderstanding. "Officer," she said simply, and in that one word there was recognition, not of authority, but of responsibility, the kind that cannot be worn, only carried. He nodded once, a small motion, the kind that acknowledges without defending. The second officer stepped back slightly, giving her space, not directing, not controlling, just allowing the moment to move forward on its own. Naomi placed the last bag into her trunk, adjusted it slightly so it would not tip over, then closed it gently, the sound soft, final in a way nothing else had been. She turned back toward them, her posture unchanged, her presence steady, as if the situation had passed through her without altering who she was. The sun had shifted slightly in the sky, casting longer shadows across the parking lot, stretching everything out just a little further, as if giving the moment more room to breathe. Brooks stepped back, just one step, but enough to mark the distance between who he thought he was in that moment and who he now understood he had to be. And in that space, something unspoken settled between them all, not resolved, not forgotten, but recognized. And that recognition carried more weight than anything that could have been said out loud. The parking lot did not return to normal right away. It lingered in that strange in-between, where something had ended but had not yet fully settled. Naomi Carter stood beside her car for a brief moment longer, not because she needed to, but because she allowed the silence to complete itself. The breeze moved lightly across the asphalt, carrying the faint rustle of paper and distant traffic. Ordinary sounds returning slowly as if they had been waiting for permission. She rested her hand gently against the closed trunk, not gripping it, just feeling its surface, grounding herself in something simple and real. The second officer remained a few steps away, posture relaxed now, no longer leading, no longer correcting, just present in a space that no longer required intervention. The crowd had begun to thin, people stepping back one by one, some exchanging quiet words, others leaving without speaking at all, their faces carrying that subtle expression of witnessing something they did not expect to see. Brooks remained where he was, not moving forward, not turning away, his eyes fixed somewhere near the ground, as if replaying the last few minutes in a loop that did not offer him a different ending. Naomi finally stepped away from the car, her movements unhurried, her presence unchanged. She reached into her purse and retrieved her keys, the small metallic jingle cutting softly through the air, a normal sound that felt almost unfamiliar after everything that had just unfolded. She looked once more toward the officers, not searching for acknowledgement, not waiting for anything, just recognizing their presence in the same calm way she had from the beginning. "Take care, officer," she said quietly, her voice even, not carrying weight but leaving it behind. Brooks looked up at that, the words landing differently than anything else she had said, not because of what they meant, but because of how they were given, without edge, without condition, just offered, and that made them heavier than any accusation could have been. He nodded once, a small, restrained motion, not trusting himself to say more. Naomi turned then, opening the driver's door, the soft creak of the hinge sounding louder than expected in the quiet. She paused just before getting in, her hand resting lightly on the frame, her gaze lifting briefly toward the sky, the late afternoon light stretching across the lot, warm, steady, unchanged by what had happened below it. She took a slow breath, not releasing tension, but acknowledging it, then slid into the seat, closing the door with a gentle, final sound. The engine started a second later, a low, familiar hum, and as the car pulled out of the space, it did not rush, did not linger, it moved forward at a steady pace, leaving behind a moment that no longer belonged to her. Brooks watched the car until it disappeared beyond the row of parked vehicles, his shoulders lowering slightly, not in relief, but in recognition. The second officer glanced at him briefly, then away, giving him the space to stand inside what had just occurred. No instructions followed, no immediate correction spoken out loud. Because some lessons arrive without direction, and they stay longer that way. The radio remained quiet, the parking lot nearly empty now, and in that quiet, what remained was not the event itself, but the understanding that followed it, subtle, unavoidable, and far heavier than the moment that created it. The sound of her car faded into the distance, but the moment did not leave with it. It stayed behind, settling into the quiet spaces between those who had witnessed it and somewhere far from that parking lot. In a building where silence carried authority instead of uncertainty, Naomi Carter stepped into a different kind of light. The marble floors beneath her feet reflected a calm that had been earned long before that afternoon. Her heels moved steadily across the hallway, each step measured, not hurried, not heavy, just certain. The weight of the day did not show in her posture, but it lived somewhere deeper, in the stillness of her expression, in the way she paused briefly outside her office door, her hand resting lightly against the handle as if acknowledging the space before entering it. Inside, the room was unchanged, orderly, quiet, the soft hum of the city outside barely reaching through the tall windows. She set her keys down on the desk, the small sound grounding her in the present. A folder lay open where she had left it earlier that morning, pages marked, notes written in precise lines. A world of structure and law that did not bend to assumption. She sat down slowly, not collapsing into the chair, but lowering herself with intention, her gaze moving across the papers without reading them yet, just seeing them, remembering the purpose that had guided her long before that parking lot ever existed in her day. Across the city, the same moment was beginning to take shape in a different way. A screen flickered to life in a small office. Footage paused mid-frame. A still image of a parking lot, of a uniform, of a woman standing calm in the center of it. Voices moved quietly in that room. Not loud, not reactive, but focused, because what had been captured was no longer just an incident. It was evidence. Back at the precinct, Officer Brooks sat alone at a desk that felt unfamiliar despite how many hours he had spent there. The walls around him carried the same colors, the same textures, but something had shifted, not in the room, but in him. His hands rested flat on the surface in front of him, not moving, not reaching for anything, just still, as if motion itself required certainty he no longer had. The memory replayed not in fragments, but in full, each moment connected, each decision visible in a way it had not been before, and for the first time, he saw not just what he did, but what he assumed, and how quickly that assumption had become action. The room remained quiet, no one interrupting, no one correcting. Because some realizations do not need witnesses, they arrive fully formed on their own. Naomi leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes lifting toward the window, the light outside softening as the day moved forward. She exhaled slowly, not in relief, not in exhaustion, but in acknowledgement, and somewhere between that breath and the silence that followed, the weight of the moment found its place, not erased, not forgotten, but understood, and that understanding did not need to be spoken, because it would move forward on its own, carried not by words, but by what came next. The next morning did not arrive with noise, it arrived with clarity, the kind that does not announce itself, but settles into every corner of a room. Inside a quiet conference office downtown, a screen lit up with the paused frame of the parking lot. Naomi Carter standing still at the center, Officer Brooks just a step away, the image frozen but the meaning still moving. A group of officials sat around the table, not speaking over one another, not reacting loudly, but watching carefully, because what played out in those seconds was no longer just a mistake. It was a pattern revealed. The video resumed, the sound low but unmistakable, every word, every pause, every shift in tone captured without bias. One of the officials leaned forward slightly, hands folded, eyes focused, not on the officer, but on the sequence of decisions. The moment assumption replaced verification, the moment authority moved without foundation, and then the moment it collapsed. Back across the city, Naomi stood in a courtroom now, the atmosphere entirely different, structured, deliberate, the air holding a kind of respect that did not need to be demanded, only maintained. She listened as a case unfolded before her. Her attention precise, her presence steady. Nothing in her voice hinted at what had happened the day before, but something in her stillness carried it forward, not as weight, but as perspective. A clerk placed a document in front of her. She reviewed it quietly, the soft turning of paper the only sound at her desk. Outside that courtroom, conversations had already begun, not loud, not public yet, but real. Measured discussions about conduct, about protocol, about accountability, the kind that does not disappear once spoken. Brooks sat in a different room now. Not the same desk, not the same space. The walls here felt closer, quieter. His uniform still pressed, still precise, but no longer carrying the same certainty it had the day before. He sat across from a table, hands resting still again. The same posture, but now with understanding attached to it. A voice across from him asked questions, not accusatory, not aggressive, but direct, each one peeling back a layer of the moment he thought he controlled. He answered, slower now, choosing words not to defend, but to explain, and in doing so, hearing them differently than he had before. Outside, the city moved as it always did, traffic lights changing, people crossing streets, unaware of the quiet shift happening beneath the surface, because not all change is loud. Some of it begins in rooms like these, in conversations that do not end when the door closes. Naomi finished reviewing the document in front of her, then looked up, her eyes steady, her voice calm as she spoke the next instruction in the case before her. And in that moment, the balance had fully returned, not because what happened had been undone, but because it had been seen, understood, and set into motion in a way that would not stop where it started weeks past, not marked by noise or headlines, but by quiet progression, the kind that moves through systems rather than crowds. Inside a federal building, Naomi Carter walked down a long corridor, lined with polished stone, her reflection moving beside her in the glass, steady, composed, unchanged. She carried a thin folder in one hand, not heavy, not dramatic, just another document among many. But this one held a different kind of weight, not because of what it contained, but because of what it represented. She entered a conference room where a small group was already seated, their posture attentive, their expressions measured. No one rushed to speak, because they understood the tone of the moment. She took her seat, placed the folder down, and opened it with calm precision, the soft sound of paper shifting filling the space. Across the city, in a municipal office, a number appeared on a screen, not large in size, but significant in meaning. $675,000, a figure that did not shout, but did not need to. It sat there plainly, undeniable, attached not just to an event, but to a chain of decisions that had led to it. No one in that room celebrated it. No one reacted dramatically, because it was not a victory, it was a consequence, and consequences do not need applause, they need acknowledgement. Officer Brooks stood outside another building, no longer in motion, no longer in control of the narrative he once stepped into so confidently, his posture still upright, but quieter now, as if something inside him had shifted from certainty to awareness. He looked out across the street, watching people move through their day, ordinary, unaware, and for a moment he remained still, not avoiding, not confronting, just standing in the space between who he had been and who he now understood he needed to become. Back inside the conference room, Naomi listened as someone spoke, their words structured, formal, outlining steps, policies, adjustments. But her attention was not on the language, it was on the meaning beneath it, the slow movement of a system correcting itself. She closed the folder gently, not with finality, but with completion, and as she stood, the room followed, not out of obligation, but respect. She gave a small nod, acknowledging them without extending the moment, then turned and walked toward the door, her steps measured, consistent, the same as they had been that afternoon in the parking lot, unchanged by what had happened, because her strength had never come from the absence of challenge, but from the way she moved through it. Outside, the light was softer now, the day settling into evening. She stepped into it without hesitation, the air calm, the city steady, and as she walked forward, there was no need to look back, because what mattered was already moving ahead of her, carried not by words, not by noise, but by a quiet, undeniable understanding that had taken root and would not be ignored.